Alright. Poet's Pen Ascendant build overview. Let's go. So, first things first, you know the deal. Toss it in a map, show the build in action, kind of show how it plays out. But this is a Poet's Pen Arc plus Lightning Warp build, which has grown a lot in popularity this league thanks to the buffs to Arc and a few other things. I am playing it on an Ascendant with the Slayer and the Elementalist subclasses, and this build has been an absolute blast to just cruise through maps with, as you'll be able to see here, and it works quite well in the incursions as well. So basically the whole idea behind this setup is you have the Lightning Warp for your mobility in one Poet's Pen, you have the Arc for the clear in the other, and then you also toss on an Impulsa's body armor to boost that clear speed even further and take out larger packs that maybe you couldn't hit with enough Arc procs by itself. Yeah, I was made with a mapping build in mind, and it probably could handle a couple of the tier 16 Shaper Guardians with some good player, maybe a slight swap in the setup to boost the single target. But it's mostly meant for just normal mapping stuff. You know, running a lot of shape maps, grinding them out quick, spamming through some temples by getting the incursions done quicker and all that stuff. And it's also actually very, very safe, I would say, overall, during just normal mapping stuff, thanks to a combination of the Slayer Overleech, which is getting a huge buffer of non-stop leech thanks to the Vinctar Flask, and then also just having like acrobatics plus phase acrobatics and a pretty good life pool for a build running around with 2 wands on. I think that about covers the basics, so I'll finish this map up real quick and then we will get into some of the more specific details on the build. Come back for those later. No big deal. So this right here, the single target's decent, nothing crazy, but it gets the job done for your normal mapping needs with a swap to Ball Lightning with Arc there. So first things first, the important stuff, the gear. Start off with the uniques. The 2 obvious ones being the Poet's Pens. I also have another set on a weapon swap, which is my single target setup. The first pen is Arc on, well, now it's the first. Arc on both sides, that's the same exact setup, but what I'm swapping is the Lightning Warp for the Ball Lightning, and that's so I can stand in place and just spam away, and the Ball Lightning with slower projectile support does a lot of single target DPS. And then like I had mentioned, the Impulsa's Broken Heart gives you the lightning explosions, gives you a lot of damage, gives you a little bit of defense, and very importantly, it gives you unaffected by shock, which combos in with the Vinctar Flask to allow you to run this without eating the downside of being shocked while it's on. And you get that 20% lightning damage leached as life, which would normally be overkill, but for anything that uses like Slayer Leech, where it doesn't turn off when you hit max HP, it just helps you build up a massive buffer of that Slayer Leech. And speaking of which, we've also got another unique, which has been a sleeper for a little while, I would say. The Adziri's Acuity Gloves, which the notable thing on them is you get Vol Pact if you've dealt a critical strike recently, so not really a surprise if you have a Slayer or a Scion Slayer build, you want Vol Pact. It doubles that leech, which is already super strong. And the gloves just fit so perfectly into this build because if I wasn't using them, I would have to travel all the way down here to Vol Pact. So the gloves are saving me, depending on the setup, anywhere between like 6 or 10 passive points. So they actually end up working really, really well. And I've definitely enjoyed using them. Aside from that, the only other unique item I'm wearing is a Starkonjas, which I'm not actually wearing because it's a Starkonjas. I'm wearing it because it was the only option available to purchase with the reduced lightning warp duration enchant. Now, it's not necessary for the build to get the enchant, but you can see my warps are damn near instant whenever I pop my wand skill. That's thanks to the enchant. If I take this off, you'll notice a slight difference where there's a little bit of a delay versus basically going off immediately. But ideally, I think you would use a rare helmet to get the enchant if you can find one. But it's all preference, whatever you want to use. But the enchant is very, very strong. And I think that covers most of the gear for the uniques. I've got also an Assassin's Mark on hit ring. I've definitely been enjoying this for the power charge generation. And then also the extra DPS there. I've got just another amulet and the other ring are mostly there for resists and life. My boots have their Shaper boots with cooldown recovery, which actually lowers the cooldown of the triggers from the Poet's Pen. Normally it's every 0.25 seconds, but this actually scales it down a little bit. And then they also have a damage leech that does life and mana if you've killed recently enchant. That's mostly to help with no regen maps, so I get that little bit of mana leech while I'm mapping and I don't get bothered by them. Because this build can do pretty much any map mod other than no leech. Any other map mod you can do. Obviously, you don't really want to jump into crazy combinations of things like minus max plus elemental damage or stuff like that. But the boot enchant really helps with that, and you can just farm it in Cruel Lab, which is really convenient. And the last really notable thing on the gear worth mentioning is the belt. Now, you could also do a Shaper belt like the Shaper boots and just get even more cooldown if you want to maximize your DPS. But what I opted into instead was an Elder belt for the life recovery rate mod, which is essentially a multiplier to your leech. So then that Slayer leech again that's been going off and it heals just gets pushed even further, and with everything combined that I have currently, I'm generally regenerating about 60% of my max HP per second after I take damage from an enemy. And a good chunk of that is thanks to the belt and the gloves. I think that covers pretty much all the gear. Moving on to the flasks. Pretty basic. Already talked about the Vinktars. Aside from that one, we've got a Basalt Flask and a Diamond Flask. You definitely want those. It's a crit build because you really want a consistent crit to help with the gloves. Proccing your Volpact. Basalt you need for the mitigation. Then the other two flasks are actually not really needed, and I could swap them around. You do need at least one more magic flask here for the staunching, the bleed removal, but you don't really need it to be a life flask because of how much leech and healing the Slayer leech gives you. You could actually get away with using something like an extra utility flask there, whether it be like a Jade or a Stibnite or even like a Sulfur if you want a little bit of damage, whatever it is. You don't really need a life flask. And a lot of other people I've talked to that have done similar setups with Slayer Ascendants came to kind of the same conclusion where they could just drop their life flask and it was completely fine. And then the Quicksilver Flask is not really needed at all either, thanks to you just lightning warping around anyway, and it's kind of got a capped speed. The only reason I've really been using it is because I like having the run speed to pick up loot quicker, but you could run something like a Wise Oak in this place. Just make sure to balance out your fire and your cold res at your lowest and have your lightning res be the highest so you get that lightning pen. Unfortunately, you can't full balance all three because whenever you pop the Vessel of Vinktar, you get a huge boost to your lightning resist. So you can still get the pen for one and the resists for the other two, but you can't really get all three. But it would still be very strong overall. And that's everything there. Let's move on to the tree. Like I said, it's an Ascendant. I've chosen Elementalist and Slayer. And then the Uber Lab choice was Path of the Witch, which I will show in a moment. But first, go over this kind of Scion starting area. These are all the nodes that we've taken from the start. A little bit of attack speed with the Jewel Socket and Harrier, just speed. Some crit multi nodes, and then a bunch of resistance nodes, which helps with the gearing quite a lot. And the Scion Life Wheel. And what makes part of this really really strong is this jewel socket right here with Might of the Meek. It does the 50% increased effect of non-keystone passives, so all the small ones get buffed up, which ends up being from the Scion Life Wheel, it nets us 10% life. From these resistances, it nets us about 9% a node, but then we lose 10 here, so we lose 1% all res, not a big deal. We gain a little bit of strength, we gain a little bit of attack speed, and we gain about, I believe, 21% critical strike multiplier. So the Might of the Meek basically ends up being better than the best 4-statted rare jewel that you can find. And it costs, way less than a similar rare jewel would be. But that's the whole Scion part. And then we take the Path of the Witch, go up through the spell damage, go up through the crit, grab some life, start grabbing basically life and mana everywhere we can. A little bit of damage here and there, a little bit of crit here and there. Doomcast, Crackling Speed, Shadow Nodes, and also make our way down to Acrobatics and Phase Acrobatics. These aren't really necessary, but if you're in hardcore, especially this league incursion with all the spell damage coming from a lot of the incursion mobs, getting Phase Acrobatics specifically is just really, really strong, I think. So I think it's definitely worth the travel there. And the only other thing I think really worth mentioning is grabbing a Watcher's Eye Jewel with one of the Wrath effects. There's 3 that are pretty good. There's the Wrath crit chance, there's the Wrath lightning pen, and there's the Wrath lightning damage. I believe the lightning damage and the lightning penetration are both very comparable. They're pretty similar in total DPS boost, with the crit a little bit behind. I would recommend getting the lightning damage because at least right now I think they're the cheapest anyway, but like I said, any of the 3 works really well, gives you a nice boost. And that is the tree. So, Bandits, I chose to help Alira. Again, it's a crit build. Get that all res for the gearing. Get that little bit of mana regeneration to help sustain the barrage. And get that crit multi for the DPS. On the Pantheon side of things, the minor Pantheon, you can kind of just pick whatever you want. My go-to is almost always Growth Coal for at least normal mapping stuff. But the major Pantheon, you need Soul of Aracali. And specifically with that first upgrade on it, which grants 50% recovery rate of life and energy shield if you've stopped taking damage over time recently. So that recovery rate is the same as what we saw on the belt. It basically acts like another multiplier to the leech. It adds together with the belt, but then multiplies in. And there's a really easy way to trigger this, which is you run Blood Rage. Where is Blood Rage? There is Blood Rage. You run Blood Rage to... It gives you attack speed and frenzy charges anyway, but it also does a little bit of physical degen, damage over time. But if you also run Cast when damage taken, Immortal Call, whenever you get hit and your Immortal Call triggers, you temporarily stop taking damage from the Blood Rage, which activates the recovery rate from this Pantheon. So essentially, whenever you get hit, which is when you need the recovery, you get boosted recovery. So you 100% need that. And I don't think any of the other major Pantheons really even come close. Speaking of the gems, I don't think I've gone over them too much. I've got in the boots an Orb of Storm setup, which helps for boss DPS. It's Orb of Storm's Arcane Surge and Power Charge on crit. Since the only other source of power charges is from the Assassin's Mark, can't really generate it on the bosses. In the gloves, I've got the general cast and damage taken, Immortal Call duration setup, and I've also got a Vault Grace. I already went over the Poet's Pens for the main skills. My helmet has my auras, which currently is Herald of Thunder, Wrath, Herald of Ice, and Enlighten. And then my body armor, which is my main 6-link skill that I'm using to trigger the Poet's Pen spells. What I found to be the best was Barrage, which I currently have linked to greater multiple projectiles, faster attacks, additional accuracy, blind, and life gain on hit. So the GMP Barrage plus life gain on hit combo stacks up a really high amount of life per second when you're spamming away. especially on the single target setup where you're kind of just attacking in the same spot over and over. And then the accuracy is there to make sure you're actually hitting to get that life gain on hit. You've got the faster attacks to maximize your speed. And the blind is kind of just, you don't really need a 6-link. I just happened to 6-link it. And I just put blind in because blind seemed good at the time. And I think it's worked pretty well. Yeah, I think that covers pretty much everything on the build. Hopefully I hit all the major points there. Only thing left I would say is leveling with the setup. It's a Poet's Pen build. If you're planning on going Poet's Pen endgame, you may as well get them at the start and just level with Poet's Pens. I did Arc plus Freezing Pulse for, I think, the first like 6 or 7 acts, and it just cruised through everything, absolutely destroyed everything. I think I used one Freezing Pulse Threshold Jewel right here or right here, whichever one actually works for it, and it was just absolutely blasting everything. Eventually I swapped to Arc plus Lightning Warp, and again it was just absolutely blasting everything. So the leveling is really, really easy. Otherwise you just need to figure out whatever, if you're leveling without gear, whatever you enjoy as a Scion caster. You could probably still do some sort of Arc, self-cast or totems, or maybe even traps and then transition later. But that's the build. That's the character. That's the setup. Hope I covered it all. Hope it was helpful. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments, make sure to let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Later.